I'd like to introduce our presenters for today, community engagement officers. Is that what it is? Okay, Treca and Corey, and I'm not going to attempt the last name because I don't think I could pronounce it, but they're going to talk to the mental health crisis and how it affects policing. And they say they don't want a microphone, so I'm going to turn it off.
Testing. Well, okay, camera myself. Okay, good. Good morning. So, for me, it's great to be here. These kind of presentations are something that Treca and I really enjoy to do. I know, first we're police officers, but we're also community educators as well. So, being here with you folks, being able to provide some information to you all that you may not know is valuable to us and to what we do. So just to give you a little bit, and welcome to the people online as well. Give you a little history of me real quick so you can kind of understand who I am and where I come from. My name's Corey Mills. I'm a lieutenant with the Ann Arbor Police Department, and I oversee the Community Engagement Unit and a unit which is called the Problem Impact Team. I've been in the field of law enforcement for 34 years, and I see the light at the end of the tunnel, so I'm looking forward to that. But like I say, with our community engagement unit, we have myself, a sergeant, and then 2 officers, and these are the kind of things we really like to do. Most of us in the unit have been police officers for a while. We've been out on the street. We've kind of been there, done that, so to speak, and we really like to get into more of the preventative type of enforcement. And preventative enforcement is kind of an oxymoron, I think, but we like to educate the community on what we do as an agency, why we do it, and we like to hear the voices from the community so they can, in some respects, shape what we do. So we think that is very important. I was born and raised in the city of Ann Arbor. That's kind of unusual for our agency. I think currently there's about 3 people who are born and raised. I feel a sense of honor to being able to serve the community that I was born and raised in. That's important to me as well. I have a lot of family that still live here, and building those connections with the community, building those trustful connections with the community is very important to me. And as my role as a lieutenant and as a leader, I emphasize that with my people as well. And I think that community engagement-wise and department-wise, I think we do a pretty good job with that. I have Treca here, who's been in the unit for, how long? 3rd year in the unit, and she is our mental health police liaison expert. She came to the unit and dived headfirst into the connection between police work and mental health, basically. She's made a lot of great connections with the mental health, the social service agencies in the city, like the Community Mental Health, an organization called PORT, and some others. So I refer to her on a lot of questions that you all may have specifically about police work and mental health. But I can tell you in general, at the Ann Arbor Police Department, we do a pretty good job at bridging the gap between police work and mental health. As you see things transpire across the nation, within the last few years, there are a lot of very common questions that come to surface when people talk about the relationship between police and mental health. And I can tell you I've done a lot of community meetings where these questions have also come up, and we're ahead of the curve on it. We have implemented as an agency a lot of policy pre-COVID concerning mental health, and a lot of policies department-wide that deal specifically with mental health issues before it was talked about in the media. So we are really fortunate in this area as an agency and as a city to have a leadership that really pushes those progressive initiatives towards a relationship between mental health and police work. So we're fortunate and blessed to be in that position. So I'm going to turn it over to Treca. She's going to tell you a little bit about herself and her connection with the community and mental health.
I'm not a huge fan of microphones, so we'll see how this goes. I might end up setting it down. So my name is Treca Zdybek. I have been a police officer for 25 years. I am 5 months away from retirement. He keeps trying to hold me here. I say no, I'm going. I spent 23 years on the road. That's definitely my passion. It's not that I don't like what I'm doing here. I like random interactions with community members. And I find that we get that most when we are in a patrol car and we stop into a convenience store and going to different calls. At the very beginning of my career, I went to, I would say it's crisis intervention training, which I think a lot of people hear about now. There's two different kinds. There's crisis intervention training that is internal for police departments, for police officers and peer support teams to kind of manage our own stress, which is important. And then there's a crisis intervention training that officers receive. It's a 40-hour block where we work hand in hand with NAMI. We learn, medications, signs and symptoms. And I truly believe that really sent me on the trajectory to be very involved in mental health response as my career progressed on the road. I had a lot of interactions with individuals in mental health crisis, and I believe that I was able to resolve those interactions peacefully based on that training. What Lieutenant Mills was saying is I do believe that our agency has always been ahead of the ball in terms of we have DEI training, officers have training every single year on mental health that comes from mental health professionals so that we can interact and de-escalate situations without having to use force. And I've seen it firsthand, I've used it firsthand, so I think Ann Arbor is very lucky that way. We are also a community that has more resources than any other place I have ever seen in my entire life. Those resources are taxed. I'm going to be very frank with you. Community mental health is one of our biggest partners, and those poor individuals there are 24/7 on call. I think after COVID, we saw a huge spike in mental health crisis, and I feel like they are our go-to, but they are overworked undoubtedly. So we also have PORT, which is a project outreach, or PATH, where we have community members that will go out. It's an organization that goes out and helps individuals that are living homeless. We have Dawn Farms, which is a substance abuse agency that helps people with that. I am actually part of Mental Health Court, which is an initiative in the city of Ann Arbor where there are certain crimes that individuals can be charged with, obviously less non-assaultive type behaviors, but they have the option to participate in mental health court, where it's a team with the prosecutor, the defense attorney, a judge, a mental health liaison, probation, community mental health, and the police department, and we sit collectively every other week. We have meetings, we have a docket, and individuals go through a process with mental health court that when they complete all of the process that they have to go through, there is a reduction typically in the crime that they were charged with. And the benefit to that is it's kind of like a hand-holding, like let's get you clean and sober, and let's get you mental health counseling, and let's make sure that you're working and checking in with your probation officer. It's a way to stabilize individuals that are in mental health crisis, because a lot of times what we see, mental health crisis and some kind of substance abuse usually go hand in hand. So to have a court that recognizes that we have to kind of, it's like a Venn diagram. We have to put the individual in the middle and give them all of these different services. It's really a neat experience as a police officer to be involved in it, to build relationships that way, and to see, the beginning and the end outcome, and to see the progress that the individuals make. A lot of them end up continuing the services that they received in mental health court, which is great. It keeps them, kind of on the straight and narrow, and I don't think we can ask for anything better than that. So I don't really know, we kind of are off-the-cuff individuals, so I don't know if there are specific questions that individuals have that would help lead this conversation, or we can just kind of talk to you about how we respond to mental health calls. I don't know if any. Okay. So I don't know, right now, we don't officially on paper have a co-response team. Washtenaw County does have a co-response. They have a mental health liaison that is assigned to a deputy, and there are certain calls that those two in pair go out and respond to They're normally in softer clothes than what we have. The officer is clearly identifiable as an officer, but doesn't look maybe as militant as some might think our uniforms look. And then his partner is a mental health clinician. They respond to calls together with the hopes that if you can see an individual is in need of mental health crisis and maybe needs hospitalization, they're able to go through the process together. Or additionally, if they don't need, hospitalization, that you have a mental health clinician there that's able to kind of soften the response of the police department and help the individual through crisis. And they don't take any other calls, so they have time on their side. Ann Arbor doesn't have anything like that, I would say, on paper. It's certainly a discussion that our unit has had and been having for quite a while about the best way to handle mental health calls. I think it's safe to say that at least 50% of our calls involve some kind of mental health crisis. It's a very high number, whether it's responding to the shelter for somebody in crisis, whether we're sent from a clinician to say, can you go check the welfare of my patient? We have our hands involved in mental health response. I'm comfortable with our ability to respond to mental health calls, but we understand that maybe not all people are. And so what we do in the Ann Arbor Police Department is if we are sent, I think one thing a lot of people don't realize, if I can just back up a little bit, is that police officers are sent by mental health clinicians. A mental health clinician will call the police department and say, my client is experiencing a mental health crisis, could you please go check their welfare? I don't think a lot of people understand that clinicians don't go out, they don't want to necessarily go out to somebody that is in a mental health crisis because the scenes are volatile and dangerous sometimes. So we actually get put on the front end where I know that people believe that clinicians should be the ones to go out there. They're not trained to deal with people that have the potential to be violent. So I think that's why, to me, the co-response is very effective, because you have somebody that can handle the safety situation, and then you have this mental health clinician that can be the primary one that interacts with them to maybe lessen any fear that somebody might have from a police officer. So the way that Ann Arbor handles things is Community Mental Health has a crisis line, and it's actually available to anybody to call, but we use it quite frequently. So if we respond to a mental health call where we have an individual who doesn't quite meet the criteria for law enforcement to be able to take somebody into protective custody, but you can tell that they are struggling with a mental health condition, we can actually call Community Mental Health and ask them to respond to the scene. Again, it was very wonderful when the line was first started because they had time to do that. Now, sometimes their response is like, hey, if they're not suicidal or homicidal, we will follow up with them. So again, Community Mental Health needs a lot more help and resources than they have, but they're fantastic with what they do have, because number one, they can check and vet to see if the person is already a client receiving services through Community Mental Health, so they can connect that person to their clinician. If they have the time and the resources available, they will respond immediately. And sometimes, even if they don't have the time and the resources available, they will respond immediately at our request if we feel like the situation is, kind of a 9 out of 10. So I think that is not a resource that everybody has. I do believe that it's trending that way, where mental health is trying to partner with law enforcement and vice versa, and you're trying to see other counties do that kind of a response, because the end result is beneficial when you have a clinician that is trained to diagnose or kind of see things that maybe police officers don't know what the actual diagnosis is. And we use that, I would have to say, on a daily basis. And it has been implemented for us for several years, and it's been very effective in how we engage with individuals that are experiencing a mental health crisis. Ultimately, what I would like to see is a co-response. I think a mental health unit would be extremely effective in the city of Ann Arbor because of the number of mental health calls that we go on. That's a bigger conversation. It's above my pay grade, I like to say. But I am pushy, and I have research, and we are kind of working on it. So I don't know, maybe in my retirement I get to come back on the other side and, do some things with that. But I don't know. Does anybody have any questions about that specifically? Yeah?
Kind of ties into that, specifically about domestic violence calls, where people are calling the police. How
So the question was, she wanted to know about domestic violence calls and how those are handled. So I would say, on its face, are there probably mental health issues involved? Certainly, but domestic violence is a completely different category on its own. Domestic violence is the most dangerous call that police officers go on. It is, if we get on scene and we can make sure that there's no safety risk to either party, and there is a need for mental health, community mental health will come out. We do have a procedure in place where there's a victim advocate that reaches out to whoever the victim is of the assault. Domestic violence, the procedure is there's things that we're bound by law. So if an assault occurred and you can determine who the assailant was and both parties are on scene, it's a mandatory arrest for that individual. Yeah, it's a mandatory arrest. Our only challenge becomes if the assailant is not on scene, we can't obviously arrest somebody that's not there, so we would type a report and go to the prosecutor's office, and a warrant would be issued.
Yeah, not only that, but it's come a really long way since the 80s. I worked for the sheriff department in the 90s when safe house and domestic violence was really, really being discussed at the state level in terms of changing laws. And we've come a long way since then. Kind of give you a perspective of that. So domestic violence used to be just between husband and wife or so in a relationship. Now they've extended the domestic violence umbrella to where it qualifies for domestic violence, even if there's damage to property, verbal threats.
There doesn't have to be an intimate relationship either. You can just be roommates.
Correct.
If you're roommates and there's an assault between roommates, it is tagged underneath the domestic violence.
Right.
So the qualifier was intimate partner, or living together, intimate partner, but not living together anymore. No, I didn't want to.
Okay.
No, keep going.
All right. Sorry.
So just to add on to that is that presents a little bit of a challenge sometimes in a college town, right? Because we have roommates where roommates get into fights and now we're writing a domestic violence report. Looks a little different on a criminal history sometimes. So there's.
Repeat the capture of that into the mic so folks online can hear it. The capture of what you just said.
Just that the domestic violence laws have changed to where it does not have to be an intimate partner relationship. And Treca was talking about the challenges with that because in a setting like the universities where you have roommates living together, technically that would fall under the umbrella of a domestic relationship. And I mean, I've seen cases where they were charged either way. It's really up to the prosecutor to make a delineation between whether this is a true domestic relationship or not. So domestic violence laws have certainly come a long ways. And it's for the better because it protects intimate partners ultimately. So.
Wait, before you go, the last thing about domestic violence that I will say is that back in the day, the victim had the ability to decide if they wanted to press charges or not. And obviously, if you're a victim of abuse, they typically wouldn't. That is no longer. The state takes over the case. You do not have the ability as a victim to decide whether you want to move forward with charges or not. The state is going to move forward with charges. It presents challenge when the victim doesn't show up, but those are the steps that are being made to try to take some of the, onus off of a victim to have to take that step to move forward. And most of the time, I would say with victim advocates, we do get the victims to move forward. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but it is no longer a choice. When a domestic violence report is made, the state is the one that is pushing those charges forward, not the victim. So that's another huge change. Doesn't.
on with them. And that has really kind of, when they have that on, that they can de-escalate a situation when somebody's not, acutely, acutely suicidal or homicidal. They have facilitated de-escalating that situation and bringing the patient to, or the person that they're evaluating to an appropriate facility rather than an ER, for example. They fill out a petition, they call themselves a
Yeah, I feel like the peace officer thing has always been on the forums for mental health petitions, yeah. But yeah, that is the same thing that Washtenaw County is doing with the co-response. So I guess to follow back, you were talking about Detroit and how they handle it with a co-response. That's what Washtenaw County is doing. Ultimately, that's what we would love to do in Ann Arbor. Super effective.
I mentioned real quick the San Jose model and how they do
San
it.
Antonio?
San Antonio.
So one of the challenges that we face in the city of Ann Arbor is that we don't have a facility to take anybody. There's no crisis center to take somebody to. It's either U of M ER or St. Joe ER. And 2 to 4 hours, you're looked over and they, make a decision about whether you need to stay or whether you need to go. It's not meant to be like a crisis center. Some of the models that we have been looking at, San Antonio, Texas, has a fantastic model that's been in place since I think 2004. But they have actual crisis facilities that they can take individuals experiencing mental health trauma to not overload the hospitals. Same for Madison, Wisconsin. That's another model that we're looking at. So in a perfect world, if I was king for a day or queen for a day, I would establish some facilities in Washtenaw County that are at least, we've discussed like at least a 72-hour hold, going back to the issue of being both having a mental health issue and possibly a substance issue. How can you evaluate somebody in a few hour period in an emergency setting that may need to detox from whatever substance they're dealing with, right? And so you might present differently on day one than you do on day 3. And I'm not a mental health, I'm not a doctor. I'm just somebody that I've spent 25 years. We have institutional knowledge of dealing with the same people over and over again. You can see very clearly what some of the struggles are. And unfortunately, those are the things that we are lacking here to help, I think, with the processes. We need some kind of intervention center that doesn't tax the hospitals, where when we're bringing somebody in to do a petition, they can spend some time there to be evaluated. So San Antonio is amazing. They actually have clinicians. They have master level social workers that are hired by the police department. Their unit is, I think, 10 people, where there's police officers, there's social workers, and then what they have the benefit of is follow-up, right? So Corey and I go out, I'm the social worker, he's the police officer. We have an encounter with an individual, they go to the crisis center. I now, as a clinician, a few days later, get to follow up with that individual. I can help with facilitating additional care. You become involved in the process, but you are literally attached to the police department. To me, it's a fantastic model. I've watched a documentary on it. I've read a ton of stuff about it. And like I said, if I could snap my fingers, we would follow something like that here. Hopefully someday. Yes.
I'm interested by the fact you're both like talking about the ends of your careers and retirement and this stuff. And you're looking, not just because I'm old, you're looking back on what's happened, and you talked a lot about waving a magic wand in terms of response to these situations. If you could wave a magic wand in terms of the cause of these situations and how people get into that, anything you'd say? I mean,
that's a tough one. I mean, I think that's a very tough. That's a tough thing to answer because it's really all speculation. I mean, we have seen. I think everybody has concerns about social media. Everybody has concerns about COVID and the effect of that and isolation and, food and lack of exercise. I could go all day on reasons why people have mental health conditions. I don't know. I think that's a bigger conversation to have. And I don't want to speculate on why people have mental health issues. I think they're going to continue to have mental health issues, whether it's your upbringing, whether it's a genetic issue, whether it's some chemistry, when you were born, who knows? I just don't think the problem's going away. What I hate to see is that there's an uptick in it. And I feel like we should be doing better with all of the technology we have, and sometimes I think that's stifling sometimes. And then I also think there's a push-pull on what is the best response. In our position as law enforcement, it's a fine line. I think that we have, again, all we receive is annual training, and I say all we receive, but I do think that it's sufficient. But we also have those interactions. People don't see the interactions that law enforcement have with community members on a daily basis that struggle with mental health. What you see is the one incident, across the country that went really bad. Law enforcement has millions of contacts across the country with people on a daily basis, and things don't go awry. Sometimes they do. One of the things that we like to say is, I think there was a recent statistic, it was like, no offense to any doctors, it was just a statistic, like medical malpractice, might cause 250,000 deaths per year in the country. It doesn't stop people from going to the doctor, right? But law enforcement has one bad contact and people want to draw back because there's this, stigma that we're all the same way, and we're not. We don't agree with law enforcement that is heavy-handed, or law enforcement that doesn't have the training, or law enforcement that makes a bad decision. There's no good police officer that's going to side with somebody that makes a terrible decision. Unfortunately, we're human, and people make terrible decisions. We pay for the sins of what everybody else does, and it takes us a lot longer, I think, to recover. I wish people could see on a daily basis the interactions that we have that are positive. Unfortunately, those don't lead the news, right? So we do the best that we can with what we have. Again, I go back to, I think Ann Arbor is an exceptional city. I know that there are cities, in the state of Michigan that maybe aren't the same, but I do believe that our police department is way more well-trained than most. It is annual training on some kind of mental health interaction. We receive annual training on de-escalation. We receive annual training on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have been directed to take our time. Although sometimes here's a question for you. How many police officers do you guys think work a shift on a daily basis? Throw a number out. How many? 25, okay. If we're lucky, there's 5. Yeah, so there's a misconception. People think that there are a ton of police officers working. When Corey and I first started, there were 210 police officers. We are in half right now. So when you look at staffing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 2 different shifts, 5 is probably the minimum number that we can handle before people start getting ordered to stay over or come in. But there are not that many police officers on the road. Even with that, we are given the green light to take our time because our agency doesn't want us to be hasty or heavy-handed. And we take our time when we can, as long as there's no harm that is coming to anybody. We can sit and talk to somebody for an hour to try to de-escalate them or to wait for community mental health. We have that gift here. We have that from our administration to say, de-escalate the situation the best that you can. Obviously, if it becomes escalated or there's a safety concern, we have to take action at that point. But Ann Arbor is very good at saying, take your time. Go ahead, you have a question.
I actually have several, but I can share. In terms of the number of police, then what about the number that the university has? That would be separate, right? And do they mostly deal with the student aspect of things?
Yeah, so Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan are 2 separate entities. University of Michigan deals strictly with University of Michigan problems. So anything on their property, they would deal with. They don't respond to the dispatch calls that come in for businesses, traffic crashes, things of that nature. Now, that being said, if they come across a traffic crash, can they take it? Yes, they will typically call us to take it. We try to keep the lines separate, but if there was ever a major incident, everybody responds together. I'm sure you guys remember the balloon incident a couple of years ago at Angel Hall where they thought it was a shots fired. So we had a countywide response to that. I mean, it was every agency in Washtenaw County and then some. I think we tallied it over 90 police officers were there in a matter of a few minutes. We're on a metro channel so everybody can hear. So when that came out, it was a red button response and everybody came and it was great. But U of M doesn't count. If it was a major incident, they're available to us. I don't know what their road patrol numbers are. I don't know how many. Okay, so 50 total.
I guess I'm wondering about the mental health. Is there any crossover?
No. There's no crossover. I mean, they have their, the way that they handle things with the students and things that go on their property, but in terms of the mental health response, like that, anything that happens in city proper falls on us.
Including, just to give you perspective, a majority of the students that go to U of M are on off-campus housing. So that falls in our jurisdiction, so. But, you know, just to give you an example, like on a Saturday night in the summertime at Rick's, if something were to happen, they would definitely come to assist us. Again, if it's an emergency situation, but day-to-day operations, we really don't mesh really at all. So, another question? Okay. Okay, we'll get to you in just a second. Oh, perfect.
Okay, I have a question about children. How do you respond to children with clearly a mental problem when they are with their friends or on school buses threatening to shoot people?
So the threat to shoot is, this is kind of a touchy subject. When things go on in the schools, a lot of times it's handled internally. If there are issues with students in the schools or mental health issues with the schools, a lot of times those are handled internally within the school. A threat of violence, the school contacts us, and what we do is, it's like a threat assessment basically. We would go to the school, collect the information about what happened. If they knew who the student was, we would make contact with the student and their parents. There's a collaborative team of people that would come in to kind of look at the validity of the threat and then what can we do moving forward to help this student out. So the threat assessment is something that's relatively new for the school district. And typically in the past, before we had the threat assessment, it was literally just an officer getting dispatched out, taking the information, tracking down the family, having a conversation with the family, finding out if there's any mental health issues. It really just kind of depends on what the interaction with the student and the family brings to determine how it is that we proceed. A lot of times it's a kid that, it's like jokes. Kids think that it's funny. They had an exam they didn't want to go to, whatever the case might be. They wanted school to be canceled. And then the follow-up comes in with the school afterwards to determine any sanctions if we determine that the threat is not a valid threat. So did that answer your question? We wish that we had, we lost our school liaisons around 2012. So there are no liaisons in the school. Again, wishful. We wish that we were actively involved in the school and with the students, but we are not at this point. So I'll let you touch on that.
This topic is so near and dear to my heart, I felt that I had to take the opportunity to talk about it. So, like I said, I grew up in the city of Ann Arbor. I went to both Pioneer, graduated from Huron, and we had police officers in the school at that time. You know, there's been a shift. Well, this is pretty Ann Arbor specific because any other place in the county, they do have liaison officers, but they were so important. Not only for the safety of the schools, and you're talking about nowadays, but, you know, police officers, there's a misconception that police officers were there to, you know, make sure kids stood in line and they're, you know, kids break the law, they go to juvie or whatever. That really couldn't be further from the truth. We lost our school resource officers. You know, we used to have an agreement with the board, with the school board, that they paid half, and the city would pay half for the officers to be in the schools. They voted to not have that anymore, probably because of some, you know, political pressure at the time or whatever. But what they lost out of that was they lost mentors out of the schools, they lost safety officers out of schools, and they lost officers who were able to build relationship with kids for the future in the schools, which is very, very, very important. I can tell you that I'm in this position right now because of a relationship that I built with a detective of the Ann Arbor Police Department back in 1989. So I know it works. And, you know, I've mentored kids throughout the years who have gone on to be police officers. That was just it was a loss to not only police department, but the community and the school system. So with all that being said, like I said, it's a passion of mine. We hope to get school resource officers back. Every opportunity that I get to talk about it, talk about the positivity of, police officers as mentors being in the schools, I do that. So hopefully we will get those back and you'll see that. When I go to trainings in other states or other parts of the state and the topic of resource officers come up and I tell folks that, well, we don't have them, like they're flabbergasted. They don't, just like some of the reactions that I got from you folks. It's almost unbelievable nowadays with all the things that go on in schools and stuff like that we don't have those resource officers back. But I'm always pushing, so I had to say that. Thank you for listening.
Anybody else have any questions? You still have some, so I'll hand it to you. I don't mean that in a bad way.
I'm frustrated by, it seems that often when something violent happens in any place, the way it seems to be dismissed is to say, it's a mental health problem. Mental health contributes to many problems, I know that, but it's not like it's said in a way to say, we need to help more with this, or it just seems to stigmatize mental health. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about it.
I mean, I think I would say that it's fair to say that an individual has to be struggling if they are committing acts of violence against other people. So it's fair to label it a mental health issue. What kind of mental health issue or the reason behind the mental health issue, that's for clinicians to decide. And it's unfortunate that we don't see the behavior ahead of time to be able to stop it and prevent it, and that we have to deal with it on the back end. But I don't think that calling it a mental health issue, I guess I don't think it stigmatizes it, because I think that you're just calling it what it is. The issue is, how do you fix it, and how could we have prevented it? And I think that those are the conversations, the tough conversations that we are reluctant to have. I just did a Alice presentation at a school, and Alice is it's an acronym for an active shooter. Have you heard either run, hide, fight or active shooter presentations? So Alice is the actual acronym. It's the company. It's kind of the trademark brand. We do those presentations a lot in schools and churches and in businesses. Businesses, it's a different nuance because we can't use the Alice. We can only use the Alice in certain settings. But it's basically teaching individuals that work in environments, the run, hide, fight concept, if you were ever to have an active assailant come in. And somebody had kind of brought up the same thing about the stigma, but then said, like, well, could you, I can't remember how they worded it, could you give us the characteristics of an individual that might be an active assailant in a school? I said, well, frankly, let me flip it on you. Could you identify a student that you might think has some mental health issues? And she was like, touche. And I said, okay. So I said, so here's where we drop the ball is, and I'll go specifically to the school environment, but even any other environment. We are so politically afraid to say we see this person struggling because we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to be the one that stigmatizes. We don't want to label. But everybody, I'm sure, in this room, I'm not asking to raise your hand, has met somebody that you're like, they seem a little off, or they've had an interaction with somebody that seems a little off. Because we are so afraid to have those conversations, that's how I think people fall through the cracks, right? So you look at the individual in Oxford, the kid that did the shooting in Oxford. We all knew that there were issues, and I say we, like we. Everybody there knew that there was some issue, up to and including the parents, but we didn't want to have a direct conversation for whatever reason, and I think we have to kind of crest that hump to say we recognize that mental health is an issue. We recognize that there's a stigma that goes along with it. We also recognize that talking about it helps treatment, right? It helps us treat that.
But it also seems to make it makes it seem as if there's this small group that has a mental health issue. For many people that have a mental health issue, the day before they may not have. You know, sometimes people just break. And I think we have to be looking more for ways to help, you know. I mean, it's just, I guess, a plea for compassion for everyone, you know. It's not that I'm not blaming law enforcement. They come into, you guys walk into situations that I can't imagine doing your jobs. But yeah, I just, you know, we were hearing this morning about 1 in 5 people may have a mental health issue. I just think we have to acknowledge the depth of it, the reach of it.
And I think that, I don't know how to, I think the thing is that there's a lot of mental health issues for a variety of reasons. And sometimes, you know, law enforcement gets kind of brought into that as like the, you know, the buck stops here, when maybe it's just the day that the person broke. But I would tend to, I think what I see is that it's, usually there's something that led up to it, right? Usually there's something that somebody could have seen along the way. Like, maybe you're presenting just fine, and you're right, there's one thing that broke, but nobody knows what's going on in somebody's personal life, or nobody knows the history that they've had. So I don't know, I feel like it's a super hard thing to, I think everybody should be more compassionate. I mean, kindness, like, you don't know what people are experiencing. And we can say, undoubtedly, like, in uniform, I'm a mom. My husband's a police officer. I have 2 kids, you know, I get annoyed. I had a bad day. I'm not allowed to present like that at all in uniform, right? I'm expected to be under composure all the time. And when I do get snippy with somebody, it goes to my professional standards, and then I get in trouble for being snippy, right? Like, so I get the whole people not being compassionate. Sometimes I'm like, you just have some grace for me that I'm annoyed today, you know? I want to stop somebody in a traffic stop and say, my kids didn't do their homework last night. So I agree with you. Compassion could go a long way, but I do believe that, you know, I think that from what I've seen, again, not a mental health clinician, there's usually signs along the way that somebody is having a hard time. People that they know, I mean, when I'm having an off day, my boss knows, we don't live together, we just work together, right? You can tell when somebody is progressing towards a certain way, and it's asking those questions and being okay with asking those questions, you know? I'm also a big proponent, if I can get on my soapbox, like, go outside and take a walk. Let's eat healthy food. Like, we don't teach our youth, like, it's okay to sit inside and game for 15 hours. No, it's not. You need to go outside and play. Like, we were all raised in the generation of don't come home till the lights come on, or street lights come on. We've gone away from that. We don't promote in school recess or gym or healthy eating or all that kind of stuff. So those are things that contribute to mental health issues as well. So I think that's a societal failure. You know, we look at what is in our diets. I could go on and on about that kind of stuff. Drives me crazy. Go ahead.
With guidance counselors in schools?
We do not.
That's where you might hear about people who talk.
Like my boss said, though, we're not welcome. We're not welcome. We are not welcome, unfortunately. And I'm not getting political. I'm stating a fact. We can't interject ourselves in a place where the doors aren't open. So we can't walk through the schools. It makes it hard to go meet with the guidance counselors or interact with kids. So until the door opens, there's a lot of things that we would love to do. We are willing to do it. It has to happen in a different capacity.
I got this one.
Okay.
I want to respect your time. You give a lot of your time to be here and to help the community and help build these bridges. But I wanted to give the mic over to Jane and share kind of one last story and comment as we close up.
Thanks, Darcy. I just want to say thank you. And I'll get teary now because you've been a big part of my child's life. And you never made us feel like we were bad parents. And we were connected to resources, and you knew us after a while. And so I know that it's hard for everyone to navigate this. And I continue to do that to this day. And I'm really sorry I'm weepy because I'm really, really grateful. So I just wanted to say those as final words because I know it's a challenging job. But your work made a difference. Thank you.
So, as someone who is part of the leadership of the Ann Arbor Police Department, it truly warms my heart to hear that the people that I have working for me have impacted you and your family in the way that they have, in a very positive way. And I appreciate that. I appreciate you coming out in front of the group here to give us kudos for that. Those are the type of stories that can get a police officer through the next 10 years of their career. Hearing something like that, I can tell you that right now. So I appreciate it. And, we are here to support you, support families in the same way. And I can say with 100% confidence that that is not the only positive story for our officers impacting families in a positive way. And that's, for our unit, this is what gives us the gold star, on our career is hearing stories like this. Very impactful. Thank you very much. So to wrap up for today, we appreciate you inviting us here to, have these conversations. Hopefully the information that we provided, gave you a better understanding on how we deal specifically with mental health issues. Like's been said numerous times, that I think that as the Ann Arbor Police Department, we do better than a lot of other agencies out there. I really do. And I like every chance I get to pat ourselves on the back, I do that because I truly believe that. At any time you want us to come out and have discussions about anything, that's what our unit does. We, go out and engage and have presentations about 200 times a year to different communities within the city. And that's how we get to, change perspectives out there. Unfortunately, during a period of time, COVID especially, people kind of got their news from social media and the media about how we did things. There's another perspective out there, and hopefully we've shared that with you all today. So do appreciate it. Hopefully we can have more of these discussions. Just contact our office to let us know, and we'll be more than happy any day to do that.
I just want to tack on, Christy has my email. Her and I corresponded from email. If there's anybody that had a question that didn't get the opportunity to answer or didn't want to ask it publicly, you are more than welcome to reach out. At least for the next 5 months, I will be readily available. So please.